Chapter 9. Through Enemy Territory. My head is swimming. Where am I? And why am I so tired? I can smell the sea. I can hear the tiny things. They're making a lot of noise. So tired. Kong's eye, only slightly open and glazed over, slid closed as he drifted completely into unconsciousness. Feel, Dr. Lin sighed quietly. Dr. Andrews glanced at him out of the corner of her eyes and subtly shook her head as Gia looked between them curiously. How long will those sedatives keep him under? Dr. Andrews' lips pursed as she rolled her eyes. For the third time, Nathan, they'll keep him under for a few hours at a time. The exact amount is a little random, she replied. Reading the lips, Gia smirked before hopping onto a chair so she could see Kong outside. He lays on his side, head against his shoulder, with one hand partially hanging over the edge and being gently caressed by the splash of the waves beneath the ship. He occasionally lets out a little grumbles and groans as his mind slipped between the conscious, semi-conscious, and unconscious. And watching him sleep, she couldn't help but let slip a subtle frown as she hopped off her chair and went to stand by Dr. Andrews' side again. You sure about this, Dr. Andrews? Came a voice from her left. Sure. Almost as sure as I can be, Admiral Wilcox, she replied. Have you done as we asked? Yes. We're keeping an eye on Godzilla via satellite. He's hanging out in the northwestern Pacific, not far from Japan, and he doesn't seem to be moving just yet, the Admiral replied. She nodded her head. But if he does move, and if he comes for this fleet, what's the plan? He asked. The plan is to present new threat to him, came a familiar voice from the back of the bridge. Doctor? The Admiral asked as he looked over his shoulder. Godzilla does not exist to destroy. He is nature's enforcer of balance among the Titan. If he perceives Kong as a threat to that balance, then he will likely come to determine Kong's intention. If Kong defies him or refuses to acknowledge his position at the top of the Titan's food chain, Godzilla will force Kong to submit, Serizawa said calmly. You mean he's gonna fight Kong? Right, Doctor? The Admiral asked. Serizawa nodded, and the Admiral looked at Dr. Andrews, who was looking at Serizawa in complete shock. You never said anything like this in our meeting before, Serizawa, she growled. Dr. Serizawa gave a subtle nod and glanced at the table between them. Apologies, Elaine. Apologies, she screamed as she stormed across the table and slapped him across the face. You knew all about this. You knew all this about Godzilla, his position in the food chain, his behavior. You knew, and you never brought it up until now, just now, she yelled. Serizawa adjusted his jaw and sighed through his nose. I have spoken about it at length before to all my colleagues, you included. I did not bring it up at our meetings about Kong because I presumed you remembered. That's no excuse, you bastard. You put the responsibility of Kong and Scoia'tael on my shoulders and then left me to it without any other support. I had to find support myself. I had to comb through Monarch's database myself to learn what there was to learn about Kong and the island. I had to discover what secrets were on the island about Kong and the other titans like the skull crawlers myself. I had to to figure out how to safely contain Kong in the little bit of the islands we could spare when the storms took over. And you expect me to remember one or two talks when you had about Godzilla many years ago just because he's a favorite damn titan? She slammed her fist into the table and instantly regretting it as a wave of pain shot through her arms. Sarasara gave a subtle move towards her, but refrained. She, on the other hand, was on her side immediately. I'm sorry, Elaine, he said calmly. Doctor, she growled as she cradled her hands. Dr. Andrews, she said, through grit teeth and a harsh glare. Standing up straight and staring into his eyes, with pure ire practically seeping from them, she huffed a breath through her nose and stormed out of the room with Gia in tow. Dr. Sarasawa sighed quietly to himself and closed his eyes. Sarasawa, came Dr. Lin's voice. You really knew all about about Godzilla's place in the Titan world and his behavior, and you didn't think to tell us before we got Kong on the boat, he continued. Sarasawa opened his eyes and glanced towards Dr. Lin, who, more than anything else, looked incredibly disappointed. I'm sorry. I thought that you explained already. You thought we all remember what you said about Godzilla. But remember, those conversations took place almost 10 years ago, if not more. And when I was in with Monarch, I was just as busy with my own projects as you were with yours. Dr. Lynch walked up to him and subtly shook his head. You should have brought it up, Sarasawa. You should have given us everything we knew about Godzilla right up front when we were all around that table. Nobody knows Godzilla like you do. So even if you think it should be common knowledge among Monarch staff, that doesn't mean it is. Not unless you put in the effort to share it more readily and consistently. With that, Dr. Lin left the bridge as well, leaving Sarasawa with the Admiral, who raised his eyebrow and looked out at the window at Kong. So, Doctor, if Godzilla does come to fight Kong, what do we do? Sarasawa joined up near the windows and forward stations. The Titans are too dangerous to risk interfering should a fight break out. We must let them decide a winner. The Admiral glanced at him out of the corner of his eyes. So, we just let them fight? And that's it? Sarasawa nodded. Let them fight. The Admiral took a deep breath. That's putting a lot of risk either way. Which way, Doctor? My men's lives aren't expendable. If two of them fight and they begin sinking the ships or putting the lives of my men at risk, I'm dumping Kong into the sea, and we're getting the hell out of here. Got it? Did you discuss this with Dr. Andrews? No, why? Because she has final words on what happens with Kong, Sarasawa said as he exited the room. Great, the Admiral grumbled. In her room, Dr. Andrews and Gias were tending to her hand, which was now slightly puffy. Gently applying a pain-killing ointment and wrapping it up, they were able to relieve the pain, at least for now. She smiled at Gia and gave her a little forehead bump. Is it okay? She sighed. It will be. Promise? I promise. The two shared a hug and left the room, and nearly smashed Dr. Lin's nose in with the door by accident. Nathan, sorry about that. No, it's okay. I didn't get hit, just startled. Okay, good. How are you two feeling? A moment of silence. You should have you should have told me, he said quietly but harshly. I agree. We all worked hard in Monarch. Lots to think about. Lots to do, he said. She nodded. Well, we're already here now, so it's best to soldier in and just do everything we can to make sure Kong stays in one piece until we get there. If Godzilla moves for us, we at least will have advance warnings and some time to figure out what to do about Kong. Again, She nodded. Yeah, well, you two should probably just get some rest. It's getting late anyway. Yeah, I think we will. Thanks, Nathan. Sure thing. Shaking, taking his advice, the pair went back to the room and had dinner before watching some Disney movies together, Moana being Gia's favorite, and going to bed. The following day, Kong was wide awake and sitting on up, watching the sea. Dr. Lin was standing just by the stairwell leading up to the bridge with Dr. Andrews and Gia standing next to him. Scared? She asked. What? Oh no, just watching, he replied. Gia looked up at at Dr. Andrews and sighed, coward, which Andrews couldn't help but chuckle at. What did she say? Oh, it means you're very brave. Really? Yeah, she replied while looking at Gia, who was still smiling. Dr. Lin chuckled and looked at Gia, mimicking the sign back to her, which made the girl shake her head slowly, still smiling ear to ear. Suddenly, a helicopter arrived and began blowing a lot of wind over the deck, making Dr. Andrews shield Gia from the winds while Nathan backed up a step and gripped the stairwell railing. Out of the helicopter stepped a woman of Latin descent who approached the pair with a confident smile as she walked towards them with her back to Kong. Who's the idiot who came up with this idea? She asked while gesturing over her shoulder. Dr. Lin chuckled nervously. Mia, Mia, Mia Siemens. My father sent me. I run point from Force Apex. Nathan Lin, mission chief. Mission chief. He walked forward, keeping his eyes on Kong, and leaned forward to reach out and shake her hand. She raised an eyebrow, but shook his hand anyways. Yeah, don't worry. I'm just here to babysit, she said. She said while walking around him towards the stairwell. The Hollow Earth aerial vehicles are on the way to Antarctica as we speak. I know you people at Monarch thinks you're cutting edge, but these prototypes we're learning you will make what you're flying look like use metas. Metas. But I love metas. Metas. Also, I'm not with Monarch anymore. Fascinating. But don't forget about the price tag. Price tag, which is obscene, of course. The anti-gravity engines alone produce enough power to light up Vegas for an entire week, she said before stopping at the top of the stairs and turning to give him a sideways look. Feel free to be impressed. Dr. Lin said nothing but glanced to the side with a semi-tightened lips. Wow, he said sarcastically. That evening, a storm raged above the seas, drenching Kong and anyone aboard who was unfortunate enough to be on deck at that time. Meanwhile, inside the bridge, we'll be at Antarctica in about 48 hours. This path, he said while pointing to the tablet as he marked which entrance they were taking, will, will get us into the Hollow Earth. And once we're there, Kong should lead us to the power source. We just need to follow his lead while he follows his instinct. Everyone glanced around to each other. Now, the gravitational inversion will be quite intense. Our best guess is that on entry it would feel like a bungee jumping with the cord tied around your lower intestine. A few eyebrows went up. But if your helicopters are as good as you heaves, Maya interrupted. If your heaves are as good as you say they are, I believe we can do this. Oh, they'll do the jobs. You just gotta do yours, she replied. Excellent, Dr. Lin said with a hint of irritation. And what about anything else we find down there? Mark asked. Kong should protect us down there, Dr. Lin said. How do we know that? Dr. Chen asked. We don't, Mark replied. Kong has a relationship with humanity, so I think we'll be okay, said Dr. Lin. That's just an assumption, Nathan. Just because Kong had a relationship with the Iwi people, doesn't mean he has one with the rest of humanity, Dr. Andrews countered. Maybe, but still, he knows we're trying to help him. Go home, right? He asked. No. We have no knowledge of how far Kong understands what's happening, she replied. And in the meantime, we have the problem of Godzilla, the Admiral said as he stepped forward. We've been avoiding his known territorial waters, but our satellites picked up movement. He looked at Dr. Andrews. He's coming. Her expression said it all as her wide eyes blinked slowly, and she looked out of the window at Kong. Our plans have not changed. If Godzilla arrives, we are presenting ourselves as passive. Let him approach and let nature take its course, Sarah said. Dr. Andrew was in no mood to argue, but her tight lips and hand clenching in fist on the back of the chair were enough for Dr. Lin to take notice and clear his throat. Anyways, um, we need to figure out what to do when we get to Antarctica. Do we have a way to encourage Kong to go into the tunnel? He asked Andrews. No, she replied. Mark glanced to the side. Actually, we might, he said, causing everyone to look at him. If we go first, we might be able to prove to Kong that it's safe. Mammals don't naturally make nests or dens in the ground are wary of tunnels and caves by nature. So, if we just show him it's okay, then he should follow and take lead of his own accord once we reach a more open area down there. Dr. Lin nodded excitedly. Nice, he exclaimed. All lovely thoughts, Mr. Rochelle, but we still need to answer the more important question. What do we do if Godzilla and Kong starts fighting? The Admiral said sternly. I won't risk the lives of my men for Kong, Dr. Andrews. You and I have discussed this a few hours ago. But for everyone else, I want you to know, if those two go at it, we are going to turn around and head to the mainland and let them figure this out, he continued. Bad idea, Mark said. Why is that, Mr. Rochelle? Because Kong is a titan, and Monarch cannot and will not abandon a titan to help. In need of help, Dr. Chen added. Aline, Sarah said firmly. She tightened her lips and huffed a breath. Mark, you were saying? Sarah continued. Yeah, turning around and leaving is a bad idea for two big reasons. One, Godzilla may perceive movement as an act of aggression and turn on us. Two, if Kong wins this scuffle and drives Godzilla away, he's going to know we abandoned him. And if he swims as fast as I think he does, he's not likely going to let us off the hook for it, Mark continued. Myro took a deep breath and sighed through his nose. So, you're saying we'll have to sit still while they fight? He asked. If they fight, yes, we'll need to keep still, not give either one of them reasons to think we're creating a problem, Mark affirmed. Hey, is she supposed to be out there? Maya suddenly interjected. Dr. Andrews looked outside and saw Gia approaching Kong, and her heart leapt out of her mouth. These chains! Kong raised his arm high up, pulling the chain taut. These puny things! They take my home! They take my freedom! They put me in the never-ending waters! They leave me in the rain. Why? Kong roared furiously and pulled on the chains until they were creaking and groaning dangerously against the anchor points nearby. Gia, meanwhile, was in her raincoat approaching Kong. I wish to return, he roared again, raising and stamping a foot down into the deck of the ship, causing it to rock and Gia to lose her balance momentarily. The movement caught his eyes, and he locked his gaze on Gia, the kind, tiny one. Kong leaned in to get a closer look, and Gia raised a hand with a finger pointed at him. You've come to comfort me. Kong's face softened and his roaring turned to a quiet, mournful groans as he reached out with his own finger towards the girl. You understand my pain. Gia kept her eyes locked on Kong, and even in the rain she could feel his heart beat through the deck beneath her feet. I wish to go home. His finger reached Gia, who opened her hand and brushed his fingertip. Kong retracted his hand and sat back with another saddened groan. Dr. Andrews approached and turned Gia around, signing furiously. What are you doing out here? She demanded. Kong is sad. That's because he doesn't understand. We're trying to help him. Gia glanced back at Kong, who observed the conversation. He doesn't believe that. How do you know? He told me. Dr. Andrews' eyes widened. Bereavement caught her eyes, and she looked up at Kong. She saw his hand coming up to his face as he signed the word home. He signed it again, and Dr. Andrews' jaw dropped as she held Gia's hand and stood up. I want to go home, Kong signed. Everyone on the bridge was just as slack-jawed as Dr. Andrews. Please, take me home, Kong sighed. Dr. Andrews' eyes started welling up as she looked at Gia in pure shock. See? Gia sighed. Dr. Andrews knelt back down. Why didn't you tell me? He didn't want you to know. Why? Kong was scared. Why? Because of what happened on the island. You put him in a cage, and you put him on a boat. He does not trust you. Dr. Andrews' heart about shattered like glass in her chest as she glanced up at Kong, who was staring right at her with a mournful gaze. Standing up straight, she walked a bit closer to Kong. Don't be afraid. We want to help you. Kong's help. Kong Kong's hand came up. Reason is not help. Her legs became weak as she gasped back tears. I'm sorry, she sighed. We didn't mean to cage you, but we wanted to protect you from the storms that took you home. Kong frowned. I do not fear the storms. The rain cannot hurt me. The wind cannot hurt me. But you can hurt me. Kong's lips curled back, slightly revealing his teeth. You did hurt me. Dr. Andrews collapsed to her knees and hung her head. Gia came up beside her and put a hand on her back as she wept and looked up at Kong. Walking closer and nearly up to Kong's feet, Gia looked up at him. We are searching for a new home. Kong's frown softened. The island is home. Gia hesitated for a second, but backed up with a smile. You are my home, she sighed. Kong's mouth opened slightly and his eyes softened. His lips closed a moment later and he looked to the side and then back to Gia. Thank you, little one, he sighed. You are welcome. By this point, Dr. Andrews had caught the conversation and half hugged Gia, who helped her to her feet as they both went inside. Kong, meanwhile, looked out towards the horizon with a grim expression. What's he looking at? Dr. Lin asked. Sarasawa took a breath. Gojira. Dr. Lin looked at Sarasawa and then to the Myro, who was nodding slowly at him. It's going to be here tomorrow, the Admiral said in a low voice. Dr. Lin gulped and looked at the satellite photo, which showed Godzilla's position in the northwestern Pacific. Chapter 10. Nature versus Nurture. You are fleeing from me. Godzilla's spines tore through the waves on the surface of the Pacific, creating a massive wake almost a mile long behind him. Or are you? Godzilla's pace slowed ever so slightly. I sense great strength in you, rival, but I sense no fear. His pace slowed even further until he was almost still. Can you not sense me? He stopped and floated up until his shoulders kissed the surface. If you cannot sense me, why? He rose tiny bit further out of the water until his chest was at water level. Have you forgotten the ways of our kin? He glanced around. If you have forgotten the ways of our kin, then you have forgotten your heritage. If you have forgotten your heritage, are you truly a rival? Godzilla turned his head, looking back towards where he'd come from, and tread the water in silence. Shortly after, he returned his gaze forwards towards the rival. No, I cannot waver. Godzilla growled and lurched forward. His head and shoulders disappeared beneath the waves, and his spines once again tore through the ocean's surface. You are an alpha. I cannot allow to run free. His pace quickened. If you call, they will respond. Our kin cannot maintain peace if they answer to two. His pace quickened even further until he was tearing through the water at such a speed he was creating a mist in combination with the waves behind him. You will bow to me! Godzilla roared underwater, which sent a concussive pulse out through the sea, scattering all manners of sea life around him within a 3-mile radius. Meanwhile, the wind carries a new scent, but it is distant. Kong sat on the surface of the boat, gently rocking left and right, watching the waves splash on each side with a gleeful smile. I could not do this on the island. Splash, splash. It is fun. How high can the water fly? Kong rocked fairly hard to the left, causing the entire ship to tilt dangerously far towards the left side. As it righted itself, the splash created on the right side rose almost all the way up to Kong's shoulders. Kong vocalized with a glee and clapped his hand, with which made most of those on the bridge hold their ears. He leaned to the right and splashed the left side with as much force as before. But what Kong didn't notice was how far it rocked back towards the right. As he happily clapped his hands and rocked his shoulders, he helped shift the momentum of the ship just enough to cause it to lurch nearly horizontally, which caught him off guard. Quickly, he pushed against the left side and leaned it to fight the momentum of the ship, and it just barely managed to right itself before rocking further left again. Kong leaned right, but not as much as before. The ship the ship righted again, and soon it stabilized. Kong heaved a breath. That was not as expected. He looked back towards the bridge from his shoulder and saw the tiny thing inside had been holding on for dear life. It looked like a mess inside. Kong sheepishly smiled and looked ahead towards the water. Perhaps it is best to have fun on land. Inside the ship, Everyone sighed in relief as Kong settled down. Jesus Christ, how about you get your little dolls here to tell him to mind his fat ass when rocking the boat? Maya yelled to Dr. Andrews while pointing at Gia. Dr. Andrews' lip curled back and she lunged at Maya, gripping her lapels and pushing her back so she leaned over the table. How about next time I open the window and throw your ass out? Huh? How about that? She screamed. Ladies, enough! Dr. Lin called. Dr. Andrews let go of Maya, but continued to glare her down as she fixed the coat. Looks like someone needs some sedatives, and I'm not talking about the monkey, she said as she turned and walked out of the room. Jeez, Aline, I'm not going to take that from her. Daughter of Apex CEO or not, she's not going to insult Gia and get away with it, she growled. Okay, okay, just try to breathe, okay? He replied. Watch it, Nathan. Inaction inaction is as good as taking the opposing side. Now that I disagree, but I see your point. So I'll just go check in with Serizawa. Leaving the bridge, Dr. Lin signed and shook his head while Dr. Andrews sat down and glanced at Gia. You okay? Gia sighed. Yeah? Why did you grab her? Dr. Andrews smiled and shook her head. She said something really mean. Really mean? Dr. Andrews nodded. Really, really mean. Gia's lip pursed as she looked at the direction Maya had gone, which was out towards the stairwell leading to the deck. Not a nice lady, is she? Dr. Andrews shook her head. Don't trust her? Again, she shook her head. Kong doesn't trust her either. He says she smells bad. Dr. Andrews chuckled and ruffled Gia's hair. Gia responded by using a motion similar to patty cake to smack Dr. Andrews' hand away, which then turned into a game of whether or not the doctor could reach her hair to ruffle it further. In his room, Serizawa sat with Dr. Chen in the corner watching him. He was looking at his watch again, a more and more common sight as Godzilla's arrival became imminent. Are you worried? She asked. He nodded absent-mindedly. About who? No reply. Doctor? No reply. Serizawa? She asked more forcefully, which snapped him out of his thoughts. I'm sorry, Aline. What were you talking about? Are you worried about something? She asked calmly. Oh, yes. What's about? About that Gojira might do. What Gojira might do if Kong shows any aggression towards him. Are you worried for Kong or Godzilla? Both of them. Do you think they'll kill each other? Not exactly. Then what do you think? I think Gojira is, how can I say it in English? Primal. It is different. How? I need to ask Mark. Can you call him? Sure. She dialed Mark's number, and a few minutes later, she knocked on the door and entered when called. What's up, you two? He asked. Mark, can you please look at the footage here? Serizawa asked. He showed Mark some footage of Godzilla's behavior over the past years when engaging with other titans, and then showed him footage of Kong's behavior on Skull Island before the storms took over. Do you notice anything different about them? He asked. Not really. What are you looking for? Mark asked. Serizawa sat back and mused for a moment. Gojira seemed to have a more primal behavior pattern. Maybe I'm just getting old, but it feels like his behavior is different from Kong's at some kind of fundamental level. Does that make sense? Mark rewatched the footage, and he observed Kong's behavior and movement. He blinked and rewound the footage and watched a few more times. Then Godzilla's. Then Kong's. Godzilla's. Kong's. You're right, he whispered. Sarazawa and Dr. Chan both perked up, and Aline walked over to lean in and looked at the footage as well, with their hands off Mark's shoulders. It's subtle, but there's definitely a different kind of movement between them. Kind of like how people raised in different parts of the world walk slightly differently from one another, especially in America, Mark joked. Sarazawa chuckled, as did Aline. It's hard to pinpoint exactly. I'm not an expert on great apes specifically, but at the same time, there's something about how Kong moves, barring his upright posture, that would make me very nervous about introducing him to a wild great ape family if he were regular size. I'm worried they would reject him or even worse, try to kill him because he's just out of place. Yes, I had the same feeling, Sarasawa said. Looking at Godzilla, Mark said as he brought the footage up, there's a clear differences. Nothing about Godzilla's movement is modern or out of place. If he had a species of a normal size or smaller, I'd be perfectly comfortable introducing him to the wild and to other members of his species. Dr. Chan nodded slowly. So you're saying it as if Kong's too domesticated? He asked. Yes, yes, that's exactly it. Kong's too influenced by his connection with humanity to fit in with the natural order the same way the other Titans do. And I think that might also be one of the reasons Godzilla's on his ways. Godzilla's not only a rival alpha, Kong's not only a rival alpha, he's an anomaly, like Monster Zero was, Sarasawa replied. Yes, Mark said with a nod. Thank you, Mark, Sarasawa said as he stood up. We need to tell Dr. Andrews, he said. Dr. Chan nodded with a hint of knowing as she looked at Mark. Shall we? Mark asked. Yes, Sarasawa replied. The three of them left the room and headed down the holes towards the bridge. Meanwhile, out at sea. You are too close to it, rival. Godzilla's head rose from the water and unleashed a roar and dove into the darkness of the ocean.